The maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and sleepless nights, a place where joy and fear lived side by side. Nurses moved quietly between rooms, their soft shoes whispering against the polished floor, while new mothers clutched tiny bundles and tried to understand how life could change so completely in a matter of hours. It was here, in this fragile space, that Marina lay exhausted, her face pale against the white pillow, her newborn son sleeping in a clear bassinet beside her bed. She had imagined this moment so differently. She had pictured warmth, congratulations, maybe even reconciliation. What she did not expect was to be told to leave. Her mother-in-law, Galina, stood rigid near the window, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. From the moment she arrived, the room felt colder. Galina's eyes barely glanced at the baby before settling back on Marina with unmistakable disdain. She spoke in a low but cutting voice, careful not to attract the attention of the nurses, yet sharp enough to pierce straight through Marina's already fragile composure. This child, she said, had brought nothing but shame and trouble. The family did not need scandals, and Marina, in Galina's view, was the scandal incarnate. Marina tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her body. She was weak, still trembling from childbirth, her emotions raw and unguarded. She asked Galina what she meant, though she already knew. Her husband, Galina's son, had not shown up. His phone was unreachable. Rumors had been circulating for months, whispers of another woman, another life he was preparing away from Marina. Galina, instead of denying it or offering comfort, seemed to confirm it with her icy resolve. "You're not part of this family anymore," she said. "Gather your things. As soon as they discharge you, don't come back." The words echoed in Marina's ears, louder than the beeping monitors. She felt humiliation rise like a tide, threatening to drown her. Tears welled up, but she forced herself not to cry. Crying in front of Galina would only be another weakness to exploit. She glanced at her son, tiny fists curled, utterly unaware of the storm raging around him. How could anyone be so cruel at a moment like this? How could a grandmother look at her own grandchild and see only inconvenience? Galina stepped closer, lowering her voice even more. She spoke of reputation, of neighbors, of what people would say if Marina stayed. She spoke of money, of how raising a child required resources Marina did not have. Every sentence felt like a verdict. Marina's hands shook as she pulled the blanket tighter around herself, as if fabric could shield her from the venom in Galina's words. She felt abandoned, not only by her husband but by the entire future she had believed in. Then the door opened. At first, neither woman turned. The sound of footsteps was common in the ward, but something about these steps was different, deliberate, confident. A voice followed, calm yet unmistakably firm, asking if this was Marina's room. Galina stiffened. Marina looked up, her heart skipping a beat. Standing in the doorway was a man she had not expected to see here, not now, maybe not ever again. It was her father. He looked older than she remembered, lines etched deeper into his face, his hair more gray than black. Yet his presence filled the room in a way Galina's never had. He took in the scene in seconds, Marina's pale face, the bassinet, Galina's rigid posture. His eyes lingered on his grandson, softening, before hardening again as they returned to Galina. He closed the door behind him with quiet finality. Galina opened her mouth, perhaps to assert control, but no words came out. For the first time since she entered the room, she seemed unsure. Marina's father greeted his daughter gently, asking how she felt, whether she was in pain. He did not raise his voice, did not accuse. He simply existed, solid and unmovable. Marina felt a sob break free, relief crashing over her as years of distance and unspoken grievances dissolved in that single moment. Her father turned to Galina then, his gaze steady. He said he had heard enough. He said no one would be driving his daughter out of anywhere, least of all a hospital bed after childbirth. He spoke of responsibility, of decency, of the difference between power and cruelty. Each word landed with precision. Galina tried to interrupt, but he lifted a hand, silencing her without a shout. The authority in his calm was overwhelming. He reminded her that families are tested in moments like these, that character is revealed not in celebration but in crisis. He reminded her that abandonment has consequences, that words spoken in cruelty cannot be taken back. Galina's face drained of color. She glanced toward the door, perhaps considering retreat, but pride held her in place. Still, She had nothing to say. The woman who moments earlier had tried to evict a new mother from her child's first shelter now stood speechless. Marina watched in disbelief as the balance of power shifted. She felt seen, defended, valued. Her father placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, then leaned over the bassinet, his expression transforming as he looked at his grandson. He promised Marina she would not be alone. He told her she and the baby would come home with him, that there was space, support, and love waiting. The simplicity of the promise made her cry openly now, tears of gratitude rather than despair. Galina finally moved, straightening her coat, muttering something about misunderstandings and emotions running high. No one stopped her as she left. The door closed behind her, and with it went the chill she had brought into the room. The silence that followed was different, lighter, almost reverent. Later that week, the story would spread, morphing as stories do, exaggerated in some places, softened in others. Around the same time, headlines buzzed about a very different confrontation, one playing out under studio lights rather than hospital fluorescents. On a popular daytime talk show, Tim McGraw shocked audiences by standing up mid-interview and walking off set after a heated clash. Words had escalated, tension had snapped, and in a single decisive moment, he chose to leave rather than continue a conversation he felt had crossed a line. Viewers debated it endlessly. Some called it unprofessional, others called it self-respect. But beneath the spectacle was a familiar theme: the moment when someone decides they will no longer stand still and absorb what feels unjust. Whether in a television studio or a maternity ward, there are times when silence is no longer an option, when presence, or absence, becomes a statement. For Marina, the lesson was deeply personal. She learned that abandonment can be met with unexpected loyalty, that cruelty can be silenced by quiet strength. As she left the hospital days later, her son in her arms and her father by her side, she felt fear, yes, but also resolve. She did not know exactly where life would take her next, but she knew one thing for certain: she was no longer heading to the wrong station. The day was supposed to mark a beginning, but for Marina it felt like an ending unfolding in slow motion. The maternity ward buzzed softly with life, newborn cries, murmured congratulations, the distant clatter of carts rolling down sterile corridors. Marina lay propped against stiff pillows, her body aching, her mind foggy with exhaustion and disbelief. Only hours earlier she had brought a child into the world. She should have been surrounded by warmth. Instead, she found herself bracing for an attack she had never imagined would come from this direction. Her mother-in-law, Galina, arrived without flowers, without a smile, without a single word of congratulations. She stood at the foot of the bed, surveying Marina as if she were an unwelcome guest rather than the woman who had just given birth to her grandson. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Galina finally spoke, her voice tight and controlled. She said Marina had embarrassed the family. She said this child complicated everything. Each sentence felt rehearsed, as if Galina had been waiting for this moment to deliver a verdict long decided. Marina's heart pounded. She tried to explain, to remind Galina that this was her son's child too, that whatever issues existed between adults should not poison the life of a newborn. But Galina waved her words away. She said her son had made his position clear by not coming. She said Marina should take the hint. There would be no place for her back at the family apartment. Better to leave quietly, before neighbors started asking questions. Better to disappear. The cruelty of it stunned Marina into near silence. She felt stripped of dignity, reduced to a problem to be solved rather than a person to be supported. Her hands trembled as she reached into the bassinet, touching her baby's tiny fingers, drawing strength from the warmth of his skin. The idea that she might leave this hospital alone, rejected and humiliated, terrified her more than childbirth ever had. Galina moved closer, her shadow falling across the bed. She spoke of practicality, of finances, of how Marina would never manage on her own. She framed her harshness as realism, her rejection as wisdom. Marina listened, numb, as her future was dissected and dismissed. In that moment, the word, abandoned, took on a heavy, physical meaning. It pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, unexpectedly, the door opened. A man stepped inside, pausing briefly as if to take in the atmosphere before proceeding. Marina recognized him instantly, though she had not seen him in years. It was her uncle, her mother's older brother, a figure from her childhood associated with long summer evenings and quiet reassurance. Life had pulled them in different directions, and after her mother's death, contact had dwindled. Marina had not even known he was aware of the birth. He approached slowly, his eyes softening when they met Marina's. He asked how she was, whether the baby was healthy. His voice was steady, grounding. Only then did he turn to Galina. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. He asked her what was going on. Galina attempted to assert herself, explaining that this was a family matter. He corrected her calmly. Marina, he said, was his family too. The room seemed to hold its breath. Galina's confidence faltered as he continued. He spoke of respect, of timing, of the inhumanity of attacking someone at their weakest. He did not raise his voice. He did not insult her. Instead, he dismantled her arguments one by one, exposing how little they were about concern and how much they were about control. He reminded her that compassion costs nothing, but cruelty leaves debts that last a lifetime. Marina watched, tears streaming freely now. She had not realized how desperately she needed someone to stand between her and Galina until that moment. Her uncle placed himself physically closer to Marina's bed, an unspoken barrier. He said Marina would not be leaving anywhere she did not choose to leave. He said arrangements had already been made, that she and the baby could stay with him as long as needed. The certainty in his words left no room for debate. Galina tried to respond, but her voice failed. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked suddenly small, stripped of authority. After a long, awkward pause, she muttered something about emotions and misunderstanding. No one answered her. She adjusted her purse, cast one last resentful glance toward the bassinet, and left the room. The door clicked shut behind her, and the tension evaporated like a bad dream ending too late. In the quiet that followed, Marina felt both exhausted and strangely light. Her uncle sat beside her, holding her hand, telling her she had done nothing wrong. He spoke about her mother, about how proud she would have been. He spoke about starting over, about how endings often disguise themselves as beginnings. Marina listened, absorbing each word as if it were medicine. Outside that hospital room, the world continued its relentless pace. Screens flashed with breaking entertainment news, including footage from a daytime talk show where country star Tim McGraw had abruptly walked off set after a heated exchange. Viewers dissected the moment endlessly. Some saw anger, others saw dignity. The clip went viral precisely because it captured something raw, a boundary being drawn in real time. The parallel was striking. In two very different settings, people reached a limit. They chose not to remain silent in the face of what felt wrong. For Tim McGraw, it was the glare of cameras and an argument that crossed into personal territory. For Marina, it was a hospital room and a mother-in-law who mistook vulnerability for weakness. The details differed, but the core was the same, the reclaiming of agency. When Marina was discharged days later, she did not leave in shame. She walked out slowly, her baby bundled against her chest, her uncle carrying the bags. The hallway seemed brighter than before. Nurses smiled at her, unaware of the battle that had been fought and won in one of their rooms. Marina stepped into the cold air outside and inhaled deeply, feeling both fear and hope intertwine. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be questions, legal matters, emotional scars that would take time to heal. But she also knew something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer defined by who had rejected her. She was defined by who had stood up for her, and by the quiet strength she discovered within herself. As the car pulled away from the hospital, Marina looked down at her son and made a silent promise. No matter where life took them, she would teach him that love is not proven by control or cruelty, but by presence and protection. She had almost been sent away, told she was heading to the wrong station. Instead, she found herself on a different path entirely, one she chose, step by step, with her child in her arms and her voice finally heard.